My daughter called me a cheap knockoff father in front of her husband's relatives and demanded I just pay and stay silent. So I cut her off, raised a glass to myself, and walked out. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. Real fathers never say no. That was the first cut. I remember it with a clarity that makes my stomach tighten even now. Lily must have been 15, maybe 16, old enough to sharpen words into we*p and s, young enough not to understand what they cost. She had asked me for something, money for a trip, a later curfew. I don't even recall the exact demand. What I do remember is telling her no, calmly, with the kind of reason any parent would give. She froze for a second, then spat those words out like venom. Real fathers never say no. I laughed it off at the time, or at least pretended to. I told myself it was just a teenager lashing out, still loyal to the ghost of the man who had given her blood but never his presence. I told myself she didn't mean it, not really. I convinced myself that if I just kept showing up, day after day, year after year, she would eventually see me for who I was, not who I wasn't. But I was wrong. Years later, sitting at a long dinner table surrounded by strangers, she proved it. Lily was grown by then, engaged. Her fiancé's family gathered to meet us all. Plates clattered, glasses clinked, conversations overlapped in polite small talk. I thought it was one of those moments where families stitch together new threads, where laughter fills in the gaps between unfamiliar names. Instead, she cut me open. My real father will walk me down the aisle, she announced suddenly, her voice steady, calculated. She raised her glass as though it were a toast. Michael's just a failed knockoff of a father. He knows it. And really, I wish he'd just pay and keep quiet. The words hit harder than anything I had ever endured in my life. Harder than the loneliness of my first divorce. Harder than the betrayal of my second. Harder than any insult I'd heard in my years of grinding through jobs where bosses treated men like machines. Her fiancé's relatives laughed. Not all of them, not fully, but enough. A ripple of awkward chuckles. The kind people release when cruelty is dressed as humor. My heart shook inside my chest, but I didn't move. I looked at Emma, at my wife, at the woman I had chosen to build a second life with. She lowered her eyes, her fork scraping silently against the plate. No defense. No word against her daughter's knife. Just silence. And me? I raised my glass. But for the first time in over a decade, it wasn't for family. It wasn't for her. It was for me. A quiet toast to the man who had tried, who had sacrificed, who had poured himself into a role that was never his. In that moment, I knew the truth. I had been forcing myself into a costume that didn't fit, and I was done bleeding to keep it on. My name is Michael. I am 49 years old. 2 divorces scar my past. And for 11 years I've been married to Emma. When I met her, she was already a mother. Lily was 14 then, sharp-tongued, restless, still holding a child's grief but hiding it beneath a teenager's scorn. Her biological father lived in another state. Sometimes months went by without a word from him. Other times he would appear suddenly, unannounced, with a smile and empty hands. Promises but no presence. Excuses but no effort. I never set out to replace him. I wasn't foolish enough to think I could. The bond of blood, no matter how thin, clings stubbornly. Instead, I told myself I'd be there in the ways that mattered. Quiet ways, daily ways. I would drive her to school events when Emma worked late. I would sit in the car outside her friend's house until midnight, waiting to make sure she got home safe. I bought her the snacks she liked, the silly ones Emma rolled her eyes at, because I wanted her to feel the house was hers too. When she failed her math test, I sat with her at the kitchen table for hours, working through equations until frustration softened into understanding. When she made the cheer squad and needed rides to practice, I adjusted my schedule, cut into my sleep, drove her across town and back, never once complaining. I told myself these things were invisible bricks, building a foundation, that one day she would look back and realize. He was there, not legally bound, not biologically tied, but present, solid, a father in every way that mattered. The years passed. My role solidified, or so I thought. Emma leaned on me, sometimes too much, but I bore it. When Lily needed a dress for prom, I paid. When she wanted to attend a school trip, I signed the check. When she crashed into a fence the first time she tried driving, distracted by her phone, I swallowed my anger and paid for the repairs. My hands steadied the wheel for her until she could do it alone. Little by little, I began to believe I was her father. Not by blood, not by title, but by sacrifice. By showing up. And yet, the ghost of the other man never left. He hovered in her words, in her comparisons, in the way she sometimes looked at me with quiet disdain. When he did appear, once a year, twice if the stars aligned, he brought nothing but presents. No money, no help, just a face and a name. And still, it was enough for her to cling to him, to raise him up as if his absence was noble, his neglect excusable. I would listen to her stories. How funny he was, how free he seemed, how different life might have been if he'd stayed. I would listen in silence, my jaw tight, knowing she was glorifying a man who had given her nothing but disappointment. And every time I told myself, it's just longing. It's just the fantasy of blood. She'll see the truth in time. But time proved me wrong. That dinner table was the proof. In one sentence, she erased years of steady presence, years of sacrifice, years of invisible labor that I had given freely. She drew a line I had pretended wasn't there. She told me, plain and public, that I was nothing more than a knockoff, second-hand, fake, unwanted. And Emma, the woman I had trusted, let the silence confirm it. So I raised my glass. Not for her. Not for the illusion of family I had been trying to stitch together for 11 years. But for myself. For the man who had been used like an ATM, treated like furniture, tolerated but never loved. I raised it in quiet defiance. And in that act I walked away, not from the table, not yet, but from the role I had forced myself into for far too long. Over time, the small things accumulated into something I mistook for love. Driving her to practice. Sitting in the bleachers on freezing evenings when no one else showed up. Buying the shoes she swore she needed. The headphones she begged for. The endless parade of just this once requests. Each moment cost me time, energy, money. But I never counted. Fathers don't count, I told myself. Fathers just give. There were glimpses, rare and fragile, that convinced me I was right. When she passed her driving test, she hugged me tight. When she landed her first part-time job, she texted me first, before her mother, with a string of emojis and a thank you that almost made me cry. For a fleeting second, I believed I wasn't just filling a void. I was being chosen. So I leaned in harder. When her school trip to Washington, D.C. came up, Emma hesitated. "It's too expensive," she said, her voice edged with worry. I didn't hesitate. I wrote the check. Lily's smile that day, the way she threw her arms around me, became my proof. Proof that I was building something real. When she totaled the family sedan by swerving into a fence while texting, Emma screamed, Lily cried, and I paid. My anger burned in my chest, but when I saw her face, terrified, ashamed, I swallowed it whole. Because real fathers don't just pay bills. They absorb fear, too. When she stumbled through her first heartbreak, it was me who sat beside her on the couch until 2 in the morning, a blanket around her shoulders, a mug of cocoa growing cold between us. She whispered, "You're the only man who never leaves." That sentence lit a fire in me. It erased the bitterness of every earlier wound. And so, slowly, I convinced myself I had earned the title. Not by law, not by blood, but by action. I was a father in everything but name. But action is invisible. Action fades. People forget what is carried for them. By the time Lily entered her 20s, I had become the background hum of her life. The steady hand, the ever-present wallet, the chauffeur, the repairman, the voice of reason. She didn't look at me with resentment anymore, but she didn't look at me with respect either. She looked through me, as one looks through the walls of a house they've always lived in. You don't thank the walls. You don't acknowledge them. You just assume they will hold. And then came the engagement. It was supposed to be a celebration. She called me one evening, her voice bright, almost childlike. Michael, he proposed, she shouted through the phone. We're engaged. I remember smiling, sitting at my desk with work emails still glowing on the screen. Congratulations, I said. I'm proud of you. But then came the request. Not to Emma, not to her fiancé. To me. Always me. Michael, will you pay for the wedding? I paused. The words rattled around in my chest, heavy and bright at the same time. She hadn't asked her mother. She hadn't asked her fiancé. She had come to me, the one she once dismissed, the one she mocked with real fathers never say no. And because my heart is weak in the ways only stepfathers know, I said yes. Without thinking. Without even asking how much. Because in that moment I thought it meant I was her anchor. The one she trusted most. The one she chose above all others. It was the worst mistake of my life. At first, it seemed manageable. A venue by the lake, simple but elegant. A dress she found online, modest in price. Invitations she claimed she'd design herself. I thought we were talking about something reasonable, something within reach. But dreams grow, and entitlement grows faster. The venue became a sprawling lakeside estate with floor-to-ceiling windows and manicured lawns. The dress became a custom piece from Italy, shipped across the ocean at a price that made my stomach churn. Invitations became thick, gilded cards printed by a designer who charged more for envelopes than I once paid in rent. Musicians were hired. A photographer with rates that belonged in glossy magazines. Flowers flown in from states away. A cake designed not just to be eaten but to be photographed, tier upon tier of sugar and vanity. The bills swelled. 20,000, 30, 45,000 and climbing. Each time I suggested restraint, Lily's lips tightened, her eyes filling with practiced tears. But it's my one and only day, Michael. Don't you want me to have the best? And Emma, my wife, the woman who should have tempered her daughter's demands, leaned on me harder than Lily did. Come on, she whispered late at night when I sat staring at the numbers. It's her wedding. It's once in a lifetime. Once in a lifetime for them. For me, it was another lifetime of labor poured into someone else's dream. My retirement shrank. My savings bled out. My back bent under the weight of bills that weren't mine to carry. But every time I reached the edge of refusal, I saw their faces, the expectation, the entitlement disguised as innocence, and I caved. Because that's what I had trained myself to do. To carry. To pay. To stay silent. But deep down, I began to see the truth. I wasn't being asked because I was trusted. I was being asked because I was reliable. Because I was the one who never said no. Because in their eyes, my love was indistinguishable from obligation. And so the spiral continued, every payment a thread tightening around my neck. Every invoice a reminder that my worth to them wasn't measured in love, but in dollars. Still, I convinced myself it was worth it. That when the day came, when she walked down the aisle, when she looked back at the man who had carried her this far, it would all be recognized. All the invisible years would become visible in a single moment. I was wrong. The reckoning didn't wait for the wedding. Came sooner, sharper, in a moment that shattered me in front of strangers. But that is another part of the story. The real blow came without warning. Not in some heated argument at home, not in a moment of private rebellion, but at a dinner table filled with strangers, her fiancé's family, his parents, his siblings, even a few cousins. The kind of evening meant to blend two families together with polite conversation and shared wine. The air was thick with roasted meats and candle smoke, silverware tapping lightly against porcelain. I had been silent most of the night, watching Lily's face light up as she told story after story, painting herself as the center of every room. She smiled at her fiancé with practiced sweetness, charmed his mother with compliments, teased his brother with playful wit. I sat there, nodding occasionally, sipping from my glass, invisible in the way a chair is invisible. Present, holding weight, but unnoticed. Then she struck. My real father will walk me down the aisle, Lily said suddenly, her voice loud enough to silence the table. Michael, he's just a failed knockoff of a father. The words fell like a knife, their echo sharp against the clinking glasses. And as if that weren't enough, she twisted it deeper. Honestly, I wish he'd just pay and keep quiet. For a moment silence reigned. Then laughter broke. Awkward, nervous, but laughter nonetheless. A ripple of sound that mocked me more than words ever could. The fiancé's father chuckled, his eyes darting between me and Lily, unsure whether to comfort or to enjoy the spectacle. The cousins snickered. Even her fiancé smirked faintly, though he tried to hide it behind his glass. I sat there, my chest hollow, my pulse hammering. Years of sacrifice erased in a sentence. Every ride, every bill, every night spent worrying about her future turned to ash. I turned to Emma, my wife, my partner. She didn't look at me. Her eyes stayed on her plate, fork scraping against the porcelain, lips pressed tight. Not a word, not a defense, just complicity wrapped in silence. And me? I didn't yell. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I didn't beg for respect I knew I'd never receive. Instead, I raised my glass. Not to her, not to family, not to love. To myself. A toast to the man who had endured long enough. A toast to the end of my patience. That night, when we returned home, I didn't speak. I went into my office, shut the door, and opened my laptop. My hands were steady, my anger cold and sharp. I pulled up the spreadsheets, the contracts, the payments, the receipts of every cent I had poured into her wedding. $45,000, each line item a reminder of how I had been turned into an ATM. One by one, I reversed the flow. I moved the money back into my retirement account. I emailed vendors, venue, florist, decorator, photographer, and canceled every contract with precise, deliberate words. I didn't rage. I didn't apologize. I simply withdrew myself from the foundation of her fantasy. When I finished, I composed one last email. I attached a neat file containing every receipt, every invoice, every contract detail. I sent it to Lily with a simple message. I'm no longer your ATM. Ask your real father. Then I closed the laptop and poured myself a drink. It didn't take long. My phone buzzed with her texts, first confused, then angry, then desperate. Michael, what's going on? The decorator says you canceled. The florist too. You can't do this. I need those payments through this week. I replied with a single sentence. Ask your real father. Her silence afterward was louder than her insults. The storm broke the next morning. Emma stormed into my office, her face twisted with fury, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. What the hell did you do? She demanded, slamming her hands against my desk. You canceled everything? The venue? The flowers? The music? Yes, I said calmly. All of it. Her eyes widened, disbelief mingling with rage. Are you insane? You've ruined her wedding. She's devastated. Do you have any idea what you've done to her? I leaned back in my chair, meeting her glare without flinching. No, Emma. She ruined it when she decided to humiliate me in front of strangers. When she called me a failed knockoff. When she told me to pay and shut up. That's when it ended. She didn't mean it, Emma shouted. She was nervous, showing off. Don't, I interrupted, my voice low but firm. Don't excuse her. She said exactly what she meant. She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. And you said nothing. Emma's face crumpled with anger, with guilt she refused to name. You're punishing her. You're punishing all of us. I shook my head. No, I'm setting a boundary. 11 years, Emma. 11 years I've given rides, bills, food, school, clothes, trips, everything. And in return, I'm nothing but a wallet. If that's all I am, then the wallet is closed. She stared at me, her breath sharp, her body trembling. You can't just pull out now. The wedding is weeks away. What will people think? I let the silence hang before answering. Let them think the truth. That her real father can step up for once. That the man she glorifies can finally carry the weight. Because I won't anymore. Her eyes filled with something raw. Not sadness, not fear, but the dawning recognition that the balance of our home had shifted. That I wasn't bluffing. That I wasn't bending this time. She left without another word. slamming the door behind her. For the first time in over a decade, I felt light. Not happy, not victorious, just free. Free from the illusion that I was building something real. Free from the chains of obligation dressed as love. Free from the lie that silence would someday be repaid with respect. That night, I slept soundly. The next morning, I opened my inbox to another flood of emails. Vendors confirming cancellations, deposits lost, contracts dissolved. Each one was a nail in the coffin of the man I used to be. Each one was a line drawn firmly in the sand. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was no longer drowning. The blow had come. The line had been drawn. There would be no crossing back. The wedding still happened. Just not the one Lily had imagined. Not the glossy spectacle of wealth and indulgence she had demanded. The grand lakeside hall remained booked, but not for her. The designer dress stayed in its boutique in Italy. The musicians, the florist, the decorators, all gone. What she was left with was a backyard. A cramped patch of uneven grass behind her fiancé's parents' house, where plastic folding chairs replaced velvet seats and a Bluetooth speaker sat on a card table instead of a live band. The flowers came from a grocery store. The cake looked more like a birthday dessert than a centerpiece. I wasn't there. I heard about it afterward through whispers, through photographs that slipped onto social media before they were quietly deleted. Lily in a white dress that wasn't hers, standing under a string of flickering Christmas lights instead of chandeliers. Her smile stretched thin, her eyes betraying the humiliation she tried to hide. Emma went, of course. She left the house without looking at me, her face hard, her silence louder than any scream. She stood by her daughter's side, no doubt telling herself she was salvaging something, patching together dignity from scraps. But I stayed home. I poured myself a drink, sat at the kitchen table, and let the silence surround me. For once, it wasn't heavy. It was cleansing. Days passed. Emma moved around me like a shadow, her footsteps clipped, her eyes cold. She didn't speak of the wedding, didn't mention the strip-down ceremony. But the tension clung to her like smoke. Every plate she set down carried accusation. Every sigh was a verdict. And then came the message. It was short, typed hastily, almost cowardly. From Lily. Michael, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said what I did at dinner. I didn't mean it. I was nervous. Please forgive me. That was it. No details. No recognition of what had been destroyed. No acknowledgement of the years of labor she had erased with one sentence. Just a perfunctory apology, tossed like a coin into a well. I stared at it for a long time. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't ache. Instead, I printed it out. On the way back to my office, I stopped by the shelf where I kept old keepsakes. Things I had carried through 2 marriages, through moves, through the years of building this life. There, in a thin wooden frame, was a drawing Lily had made when she was little. Crayon lines crooked, colors bleeding outside the edges. 2 stick figures holding hands, smiling under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in her shaky handwriting, it read, "Me and Daddy." I placed the printed apology beside it. One truth beside another. Then I closed the shelf and walked away. Because maybe back then she believed it. Maybe in the eyes of a child I was Daddy. But time had erased those lines. The drawing was a relic, a lie preserved in crayon. And I wasn't going to redraw myself into her picture ever again. Emma noticed the apology on the counter later. She picked it up, read it, and turned to me with something like hope in her eyes. "She's trying, Michael. Can't you see that?" I shook my head. "No. She's trying to repair a wedding she destroyed. She's not repairing me." Emma's lips pressed thin. She didn't reply, and so the silence grew. The weeks that followed were a blur of avoidance. Emma and I circled each other in the house like strangers bound by walls but not by love. Lily called her mother often. I could hear the muffled conversations through closed doors, but she never called me. Not once. Her apology had been the beginning and the end. I didn't reach out either, because I had finally learned. Chasing people who don't respect you only drags you deeper into their contempt. The wedding photos arrived eventually, slipped into Emma's email. I caught glimpses when she scrolled through them at night. Lily standing stiff beside her new husband, his family clustered close, Emma at her side. No father in sight. Not the real one who abandoned her. Not the knockoff she discarded. Just emptiness where a father should have stood. That emptiness was the truest part of the picture. Sometimes, late at night, I thought about Lily as she had once been. The little girl with crayon-stained fingers. The teenager who whispered, "You're the only man who never leaves." The young woman who asked me to pay for her wedding because she said I was the most reliable man in her life. And then I remembered the dinner table, the laughter, the silence of my wife, the word knockoff ringing in my ears. I didn't feel anger anymore, only clarity. One evening, Emma tried again. She stood in the doorway of my office, her arms crossed, her eyes pleading. "Michael, it's over now. The wedding's done. Can't we move past it? She's still your daughter." "No," I said quietly. "She never was. And you knew it." Emma's face tightened, but she didn't argue. She turned and walked away. The house grew colder after that. Dinners were eaten in silence. Nights were spent in separate rooms. We lived together, but the fabric of us had already torn. As for Lily, she lived her life. She posed for photos with her husband, posted smiling captions about new beginnings, about family, about love. But the absence remained, even in pixels. There was no father at her side. Not the man who left. Not the man she rejected. Just a hollow space, captured forever. And I raised a glass to myself again. Alone. Not in bitterness. Not in grief. But in recognition. Recognition that I had carried more than my share. And finally, I had set it down. Was I wrong? Was I cruel to cut the cord? To refuse forgiveness offered too late? Too shallow? Some would say yes. Some would argue that family is worth enduring any wound, that fathers, real or otherwise, should never walk away. But I ask you, how many times can a man be told he is nothing before he believes it? How many sacrifices can be erased with a single sentence before the giver finally closes his hand? I gave her years. I gave her my labor, my money, my patience, my presence. I gave her everything her real father never did. And in return, she gave me contempt. So I walked away, not in anger, not in despair, in clarity, in freedom, because sometimes the cruelest truth is also the simplest. Love without respect isn't love at all. It's servitude, and I had been a servant long enough. So I raised my glass one last time. Not for her, not for Emma, for me. And I walked away,